What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. We are back on Chuck's 1991 GT, and we're getting into some of the good stuff. Well, the good stuff in my opinion, at least, and well, that is suspension. So if you can see, sitting on top of the boxes down here in front of the car, we have a full RideTech Shockwave air ride system that's about to get installed into the car. So I'm going to be going over all of the parts that come in the kit, and we're going to install this thing in this video. So stay tuned, be right back. Always funny how things happen in multiples sometimes, because Castle from Castle Customs has just finished installing his AirTech Stage 2 kit into his beautiful emerald green notch, and at the same time, well, I knew Chuck was going to pick some air ride. We went back and forth talking about potentially putting the SLA kit in here, but after Chuck had invested all the time and money at smoothing out this engine bay and still retaining his factory shock towers, I said, you know, the SLA, in my opinion, like, it is best served if you don't have those shock towers. Now, I know Brent from Hicks House Videos is beating me to the punch, so to speak, and that just reminds me that I need to call Spike from Spike's Refinishing to find out what the hell is going on with my 86, because, well, shock towers are supposed to get cut out of that car for the RideTech SLA kit. But anyways, Shockwave kit, nothing wrong with it. Beautiful kit. I'm going to go through all the details and everything that you see here laying on these boxes down behind me. You'll be able to see firsthand. And you know what? I've actually never even driven or ridden in a Fox with the Shockwave kit. I can only compare to the old school Cool Ride kit that RideTech used to have, which was an air spring. You know, so the bags replaced your coil springs front and rear, and you still needed to rely on a shock and a strut for all of the dampening and the rebound. So let's get into this kit. Here's everything here. Comes in multiple boxes. And if we start over on the right-hand side here, you're going to see we have air shocks, right? So this is going to go in the back, much like a coilover kit that has air ride or airbags instead of coil springs is the best way to describe how the Shockwave kit actually works. So this guy and this guy are going to go in the rear in place of the shocks, and they actually give you new upper control arms and new lower control arms. The lowers do not have spring perches on them because, well, you're not going to need the spring perch anymore. You get new shock mounts, and you get also some relocation bracketry here as well. We're going to get into how all of that installs in a minute. So aside from the shocks, you can see the struts. The struts, very straightforward. Bolts onto your spindle. Same thing, guys, just like changing your struts and not having to worry about coil springs. You get a set of cam bolts. All right, so these cam bolts will be used, I'm assuming most likely up in the front here. You can see that the hole is honed out in a horizontal fashion. That'll give ultimate adjustability, trying to get your camber sorted out, especially if you're planning on riding on the low. You get all kinds of hardware and everything else that's needed to bolt this on. So here's the plates from the underside of your shock towers, plates for the top side of the shock towers. It's almost like a caster camber plate, so to speak. And that's all the hard parts in terms of what is getting replaced from a suspension point of view. And when you look at this pile of nuts and bolts and ultimate hardware, it's really not that intimidating, right? Like I said, it's pretty much like bolting in a set of coilovers and a new set of upper and lower control arms. Now, in the rear, up in where your shock mounts, up in the rear shock tower area, we do need to do some modifications in there. to make sure that we have all the clearance and all the room that we need for everything to fit. So we will be showing you guys that. And over here, this is pretty much all the air management stuff. So of course you got airline, you've got quick connect fittings, we have a compressor, tank, and we have our manifold and solenoid banks. And this is the Ride Pro E5 kits. This is a digital kit, so we have all our pressure gauges here that'll get threaded into the manifold, and pretty much just wiring, your screen, and everything else that is ultimately required to be able to control and manage the amount of pressure that you have in your bags, and to be able to monitor all of the vitals. So when it comes to air management, you always have options. Now, air management isn't proprietary to an air ride setup. All it's doing is controlling the amount of air that's going in and air that's coming out, and how you want to manage it. You know, how do you want the air to go from the tank and get into your bag? So whether you want to use RideTech bags with a AccuAir air management, or Airlift, or AirTech, or any of those companies, you can technically cross-reference your air management with your air ride setup and vice versa. Now, of course, it's always nice to keep things matching and keep things uniform, but just to throw that out there. And there's also other types of pumps and tanks and everything else that you can use. You can have a bigger tank if you want. You can run dual air compressors. You can run Viair compressors instead of, I think these are a Thomas. Yeah, so the RideTech default compressor is a Thomas. And you guys might be wondering, well, is that enough? Well, in reality, if you just want to air your car out when you're parked and you want the car to go up, you know, when you want to take off from wherever you parked or had lunch or had a beer or whatever it might be, this is more than enough. If you're going to sit there playing with switches and thinking like you got hydraulics or whatever, well, then yeah, you're going to run out of air pretty damn quick, and you're probably going to want a bigger tank than this one. But for general drivability, cruising to car shows, everything else, guys, this will more than suffice. So with that said, I'm going to kind of do this video backwards of the way that Kazel did his. So Kazel started with all of the electronics and the plumbing and the routing, and he was doing it in a way that wouldn't incapacitate his car from keeping him from being able to drive it. And a very good point that he made, because he's like, well, if you start putting all this stuff in and you have no way to air it up, well, you're not going to be driving your car. And that's very true. It's like when my Silver Notch got stuck out in the driveway and the hailstorm came through because I was in the middle of revamping all of my air management and tank and everything else that was in the trunk. So luckily, a bunch of protective blankets and everything else saved the car, and there was no damage done, but it's something that you need to consider. However, Chuck's car here, well, it's not going anywhere for a while because, well, there's no motor, there's no transmission, there's no nothing. So I'm actually going to go about it the other way. I'm actually going to go ahead and install the struts and the shocks and the control arms and everything else. And then after, you know, we'll get into plumbing the lines and all of that stuff, because we have an idea of where we want it all to go. So we're thinking we're going to do the rear seat delete from K Designs in this car. And it's the same, we actually used one in the Shipbox Fox. So what ultimately that should do is open up a bunch of room, and these guys need to come out because we're not going to have a rear seat. And we're probably going to end up mounting the battery back here. So battery will probably go somewhere in here. And then if you see, we can probably get the air tank there. We can get solenoids. We can get everything, compressor, all hidden underneath where this rear seat delete's going to be, and should keep things pretty nice and tidy. I think we're going to go with the JBL Base Pro sub in the spare tire wall as well. So everything is just going to be clean, tucked away, hidden. You're not going to know any of it exists. So since Jerry's car is holding up the lift over there, we're going to start with the front. So you can jack this up, you know, take the few lug nuts that are barely holding this front wheel on, and from there we'll be able to take out the old Lakewood struts and start bolting in our new RideTech hardware. So let's get at it. Guys, so D for driver's side. Hold this up here. I want to make sure that those holes align. Looks like they do. It's close. You know, it could be a little bit of paint buildup on the inside here, but we should be able to get around that. This is the inside of the strut towers. Did get some rocker guard treatment. I've already gone ahead and threaded in the airline fitting here. So it's pretty straightforward. There was already your Teflon tape pre-installed on there. Just had to pretty much install it. It's a quick push connect fitting there. So now, again guys, always refer back to your instructions. So the reality is all of this stuff is already installed, right? Because all of that is going through, and the top plate here is already installed. So you can see attach the bearing housing to the caster camber plate, the housing position with the 4-threaded bolt holes in the front of the car, lining up the 2 holes, anti-seize to the threads, install 1/4-inch lock washers. So there we go. You can see this is actually already installed on here, which leads me to believe all of this stuff is already done. So all we have to do is lift this up, and we have to get our 4 long Allen bolts here, and of course we'll need 4 lock washers. Let's say lock washers. Yes. So these holes, you want these facing the front side of the car, and that is pretty much indicative of how this plate is sitting in the opening here. So we will, like so. Got the strut installed. Nothing is torqued down. As for the K-member and lower control arms, everything else waiting to make sure that everything is done and where we want it and working. So strut is in. Had to use both shims on both sides, the thicker and the thinner one, and everything seems to line up and fit good as it should. Bag is good. You can see our air fitting up here, depending on which way we send the airline, which might very well end up coming out here. I might turn it just a little bit more. It'll probably end up getting tucked behind the wheel well liner here, kind of like how on the passenger side the brake line would be hiding down here in your fuel lines and everything else. So probably end up doing something similar. So I was really hoping that I was going to knock out all of the suspension hard component install yesterday, but I hit a snag. You can see that the front is all installed and done. We went over that driver's side corner. I came over to the passenger side. I knocked that out extremely quickly. The first thing that I've noticed upon initial inspection and review is that the front definitely does not go down as much as the Cool Ride bags do. So if you guys are looking for ultra slammage in the front, then that is something that you guys are going to want to consider. Now, mind you, this is still pretty low, and you got to remember this is on the old 15-inch drag light, and there's a huge profile tire on there. So when we get something with a lower profile and everything else, I'm sure it's going to look just fine. And I'm sure the design is ultimately done for function, not only form. So I'm sure that with the air strut setup, just by design, I'm sure that if you had that ultra low, then maybe it would possibly compromise overall ride quality and performance and handling. Ride Tech would have to confirm that. I personally don't know. We are actually going to have Andrew from Ride Tech aka Pro Tour Fox on Instagram. We're going to have him on our podcast tomorrow, which obviously will have been in the past by the time that you guys actually watch this video. But maybe I will ask that question to him on the pod and get an answer so I can throw it in later in the video. So I was moving along quite nicely in the rear and trying to get things sorted out. And if you guys remember, Chuck actually has a Ford 9-inch rear differential in here. So it's going through, loosening up bolts because we have the upgraded control arms, uppers and lowers. Now, Chuck used to have, well, he does still on the one side, a set of south side lower control arms. And here is actually one of them that's out, the rear spring and his old upper. So the one thing with the lowers, I'm going to show you guys right now. So the upper control arm, no problem. And I'll show you guys how that all goes in when we get over to the driver's side. But here is a problem that we ran into down here on the bottom. So there's these plates that got welded in that relocate the position of your lower control arm downward. And what this does is it helps with your pinion angle. It helps lower the car a little bit in the back, help it squat, help it hook, all of those good things. And in fact, a Dutch grabber pretty much mimics what this is. Now, two things. Number one, because these plates are welded on the inside, means that it is narrowed the mounting point of where the control arm needs to go. So I would either have to grind down the sides of the control arm to make it fit, but the reality is we're not going to be using that because RideTech has this guy that's going to bolt on right in here to that factory mounting position. And to make matters worse, this nut is stripped on the bolt. So there's no getting this off. So what I'm actually going to do, instead of cutting and shaving the sides of the control arms, I'm actually going to cut these welds off, get rid of these plates. Surgery was a success, getting those old south side plates off right here. So I guess technically I almost, maybe I did grind through that a little bit more. I was gonna say someone could reuse those, but I think they're scrap metal. I have to actually chop right here and right here with the old Sawzall, and we're gonna fold these. I believe you fold them in. I need to double check the picture again, see what's going on. And what that does is just make sure that you give clearance for the bag up in here once that's bolted in place. So let me go check the instructions. We'll get that done. That'll allow us to be able to bolt in our lower control arm, rear bracket, and this side will be done. So here's the instructions. So front of the vehicle is that way. So we're actually kind of working on the opposite side here. So you pretty much slice a little bit to the left, to the right, and then you flatten these pieces. So we're just going to be slicing here, slicing there, and then we'll flatten these guys down and in. All right. Probably not much, because once we start feeding it, hammer will take care of the rest. There. Let's see here. here. I want you to bend this a little bit, probably for the clearance for the shock. So it's almost got a contour. I'm actually gonna roll it a little bit more, and that way there just won't be any sharp edges sticking out anywhere, and we should be free and clear. So here's our lower control arms, and the sway bar mount always goes towards the front of the vehicle. And you can see here, this has actually got the smaller hardware, which we'll keep that one in there as is. So here's the rear. I've already popped the bushings out, right? So if we do this, all right. Guys, I literally just pried the bushings out with a screwdriver. It's nothing, it's definitely not rocket science. All right, we'll go ahead, put that in, just like so. And all it is you can see that the wall of the sleeve, or the collar, is a little narrower. That one's a little thicker. And that's pretty much just going to accommodate the difference in bolt size. So guess I can't, oh, I can do it one-handed. There we go. All right. Boom. So this control arm is ready to go now with the larger hardware. All right, guys, so there you have it. Passenger side rear is installed. Pretty straightforward. Of course, it was the first time I've ever bolted one of these on in here, so there's a little bit of a learning curve, and those stupid drop plates for the south sides and the stripped bolt definitely were some unforeseen circumstances, but we managed to overcome them. And in reality, I'd say 45 minutes probably overall invested time on this side, so I'm thinking that we should be able to knock out the other side in somewhere between 20 to 30. Hopefully there's no strip bolts. And you can have a closer look here, the way that the bracket goes. Of course, everything needs to be tightened up and torqued down. It's all loose in there just to make sure that all the parts are in the right places, and proof of concept and everything else is confirmed. Our air fitting coming out here. So of course that all thread in and rotate to wherever is going to be the best spot to get the airline to be run off of that. So probably make sure that we get that tucked in a nice spot. In fact, you can see even about drilling a hole and sending the line straight up, but we'll see what the best route is there. Of course, there's our upper. So still need to get, once this is torqued down, we'll get the dial put back on so we can adjust our rebound and the shock. So one side is done from the hard part side of things. Now moving on to the driver's side. So pretty much dead accurate, but 25 minutes, got that side knocked out, even with that strip bolt and everything else. Again, everything is in loose, and be able to go through everything, check everything out, torque everything down when we're done. Got this all bent up and lots of clearance here, so that's good. And I've just noticed that this air fitting is actually on the back side, so I could rotate this around, but then the air ride settings by Firestone would be sitting on the opposite side. Not that that's a huge deal, but hopefully that gives you guys some insight in terms of bolting in the lower control arms, upper control arms, getting the mount down on the bottom side here, and everything else that is required to get your rear shockwaves installed. Now, of course, that isn't where the instructions end. We've done all this, and we need to look about notes and care for your shockwaves, right? So want to make sure that things don't rub on anything. You want to do some tests. You want to check, what do we got here? Do not drive over inflated. And take the vehicle for a test drive, another test drive, and do our shock adjustments and everything else. So that is pretty much it. Voila. Now you can see the tank sitting right there, and we still have our compressor and our wiring and our fittings and all of the air management to deal with, but that'll probably be another episode. The main thing was to get all the suspension into the car. I want to get onto the brakes probably next, so that way we have K-member, we have suspension, we have brakes, we have all of the, I guess, running driving components, if you will, out of the way, which then can allow for our wiring and ultimately getting the motor and transmission installed, and then going through and doing the final wrap up, getting the interior back in and everything else. So stay tuned, because there's going to be lots to come on Chuck's car. And we had a drop off here while I was in the middle of doing the rear. Got a set of Maker's wheels that just arrived, the 5x114, 8.5s and 9.5s. Yep, so I think that'll be a real nice addition to this car that should look really, really nice. So be sure to stick around, guys. Thank you again always for your support. Like, subscribe, do all those wonderful things, and we'll see you here next time on the Infamous Project.